I've been a huge fan of indie horror games for the past 9 years. My love for this genre really blossomed when Five Nights at Freddy's released in 2014. I was 10 years old. I've followed indie horror over the years, seeing games released like Tattletale, Emily Wants to Play, and Baldi's Basics. More recently, a potent decrease in quality is to be observed with releases like Poppy Playtime and Garten of BanBan. Before I discuss my distaste with these newer releases, let's have a little history lesson. It's true that horror in video games has been around for nearly as long as video games as a whole, but I'd like to shift your focus to, in my opinion, the game that started it all. 11 years ago, Slender the 8 Pages released. This is a big game, especially for YouTubers, despite it only being made by one guy. It was the first game to be derived from a creepypasta, and that in itself created its own genre. But Slender shined because there wasn't much like it at the time. The gameplay was actually pretty simple. Walk around the map, pick up 8 pages, avoid Slenderman. It is, as they say, that the devil is in the details. After picking up just one page, an ominous rhythm begins. As you progress, the rhythm shifts from the sound of a slowly beating drum to a constant roar. If you happen to be found by Slenderman, as much of a glance at him would be enough to kill you. That in itself provoked the inherently human fear of the unknown. This game was, at the time, a masterclass in suspense through atmosphere, and oh boy, did this game lay the groundwork for the decade to come. The gameplay concept of Slenderman, that being an unfightable entity that roams around the map in search for the player, was used time and time again. It will continue to be used for at least another decade. Tattletale, a game about a children's toy that gains sentience, follows this formula. You must complete tasks around the map while avoiding the all-powerful Mama Tattletale. Baldi's Basics more closely resembles Slender, with the primary task to complete being to gather 7 notebooks. Emily Wants to Play combines the concept of evading entities with the character roster of another very influential game. Can you guess which one? Five Nights at Freddy's brought a horrific context to children's mascots. It is essentially a Chuck E. Cheese horror game. FNAF's gameplay is so unique that FNAF fan games became a genre in and of itself. FNAF was pivotal in the indie horror genre in its recontextualization of otherwise child-friendly characters. This game undoubtedly inspired Tattletale to apply the horror genre to Furbies. But there's another game that Five Nights at Freddy's inspired, a game that I believe to be profit-driven over anything else, a game that makes me fear for the future of indie horror gaming as a whole, Poppy Playtime. This game takes the now very popular FNAF concept of making kids' content scary and combines it with a horrible means of drip-feeding content. Enter chapter-based storytelling. The first time I can remember this being used was for Bendy and the Ink Machine. It was done poorly then, and it's done poorly now. Poppy Playtime also made the incredibly tasteful decision to release exclusive NFTs for their game, and everyone loves NFTs. There's also accusations that the Poppy story was plagiarized from the Steam game Venge. Now, I don't know for sure if that's true, but the similarities between these games are great enough to determine that Poppy Playtime is, at the very least, uninspired as far as writing goes. An even worse game, that at first glance looks like a carbon copy of Poppy, is Garten of BanBan. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. This game is horrible. The mechanics and characters are lazy, and it's obvious that this game is a desperate cash grab. It is also releasing in chapters like Poppy. What this game accomplishes is following the successful horror game formula, that being a vibrant cast of characters, a horror context to kids' content, and very often provides boss-like entities to evade. The problem is that this is incredibly fatiguing. Garten of BanBan isn't, by any stretch of the imagination, an original game, and neither is Poppy Playtime. I argue that games like these, that pride themselves on being so original, when in reality they are formulaic beyond belief, are a problem. They're a problem because they take the spotlight over fantastic games that have passion poured into them. Games like Make Sure It's Closed, which I played 2 years ago. Though that game only lasts 2 minutes or so, it was a game that I still remember to this day. It was unique, and it was creative, and it wasn't made for money. Let me pose a more philosophical question. Can real art be produced if the intention was to profit from it? I want to believe that art and profit aren't mutually exclusive. Many art pieces certainly are driven by creativity, though. Let's take the new FNAF game as an example. Five Nights at Freddy's Security Breach completes the transformation from FNAF being an indie game to a AAA title. This game disrespects so much of FNAF's legacy that, personally, I elect to retcon it. It changes the character Springtrap from being a monstrous serial killer who miraculously survived a fire to a Scooby-Doo villain who makes return surprise appearances at the end of the game for no reason. This game was not made for the fans. This game was not made to be scary. This game wasn't even supposed to be released in the state it was in. Steel Wool knowingly released this game in an incomplete state. Why they would do such a thing? Well, the game had to be released in time for Christmas, so it could sell a lot. As a fan, I feel disrespected by this decision. FNAF used to be a game where Scott Cawthon would release these titles when he was finished developing the game, often confusing the community. But it showed that Scott didn't care about industry standards. Scott Cawthon has to be one of the kindest game developers of all time. He's raised hundreds of thousands of dollars for charity.
Hey, he might not be here. He might be doing something, and he might, like, he's a busy guy, you know. He's a busy guy.
And he's always kept it real with his fans. When the reception for FNAF World was mixed, Scott decided to make the game free because he wanted transparency with his community. Seeing Scott Cawthon do these great things over the years makes me exceptionally frustrated when deranged Twitter leftists want him canceled for his political affiliation. FNAF, while Scott ran the franchise, is a great example of art not driven by monetary gain. Scott had a family to feed, but he didn't overcharge for any of his games. He kept them all under $10. And of course, he ended up donating thousands of those sales. I know that we can't expect a Scott Cawthon out of every indie game developer. There will always be people that are just in it for the money. I'm holding out hope that game developers will look past financial incentives to go in crazy new directions and redefine what we know to be concrete, just like Slender, just like FNAF. I really don't want this genre to be saturated beyond belief. I want people to be able to take pride in this community. I want to see more Spooky's Jump Scare Mansions, more Ow-Onis, more SCP containment breaches, even when there isn't immediate money to make. Look, perhaps I'm a boomer. Perhaps I crave the glory days of YouTube too much. Maybe those days are just past us and I need to cope with it.